Hi, my beautiful Love Lies Diaries. Welcome back, City, and if you're new here, welcome home. Please don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because today I'm gonna tell you something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Today's story is a hard one. A story that still stings when I say it out loud. A story about betrayal and discovering that the man who preached about faithfulness every Sunday was living a lie every single day. But I believe in the power of truth. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your soul, and if you've ever had your world crumble in the space of a single moment, this one's for you. My name is Naomi, and I was married to a man of God, a pastor, a spiritual leader who stood behind the pulpit every Sunday and preached about marriage, about loyalty, about keeping your vows sacred. My husband of 7 years, until the day I walked in on him in bed with my best friend. But before I tell you about that night that changed everything, let me take you back to the beginning. Preached about marriage, about loyalty, about keeping your vows sacred. My husband of 7 years, until the day I walked in on him.
I met Jacob Williamson when I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, and trying to figure out my life. I had just rededicated my life to Christ after going through what my grandmother would have called a wilderness season. You know, that time when you're partying too much, dating the wrong guys, and basically running from God as fast as your legs can carry you. But that particular Sunday in October, something drew me to Mount Zion Baptist Church. Maybe it was the way the morning light hit the stained glass windows, or maybe it was just God saying, "Girl, it's time to come home." Either way, I found myself in the third row from the front, wearing a dress I'd borrowed from my sister because I didn't own anything appropriate for church anymore. And then Jacob walked out. Y'all, I need you to understand something. This man was fine. F-I-N-E, fine. 6'2", broad shoulders, skin the color of warm honey, with a smile that could light up a room and a voice that could make angels weep. But more than that, when he started preaching, it was like watching someone catch fire for God. The guest preacher, they called him. He was visiting from Atlanta, speaking at our week-long revival. His sermon was on restoration, beauty for ashes, from Isaiah 61. And honey, when I tell you that man preached like he was talking directly to my soul, I mean every single word. God sees your broken places, he said, his voice filling every corner of that sanctuary. He sees where you've been wounded, where you've made mistakes, where you've lost hope. And he wants to take those ashes of your past and turn them into something beautiful. I was crying before I knew it. Ugly crying, right there in the third row. And when he gave the altar call, I was the first one down that aisle. After the service, as I stood in the prayer lines, still wiping tears from my face, he approached me. Up close, I could see the kindness in his dark brown eyes, the way his whole face lit up when he smiled. "Sister," he said, and his voice was gentler now, not the booming preacher voice. "I want you to know that whatever brought you to this altar tonight, God's got you. You're going to be all right." I nodded, not trusting my voice. But then he asked, "What's your name?" "Naomi," I managed to whisper. "Naomi," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. Like the woman in the Bible who lost everything but found her way back to blessing. That's a powerful name. He was supposed to leave town the next day, but he didn't. He stayed for the rest of the revival week, and somehow, every conversation we had felt like the most important conversation of my life. On Thursday evening, after service, he asked if he could take me for coffee. We sat in that little 24-hour diner on Martin Luther King Boulevard until 3 a.m., talking about everything, our childhoods, our dreams, our relationship with God. He told me about losing his father when he was 15, how that loss drove him to ministry. I told him about my struggles with self-worth, how I'd been searching for love in all the wrong places. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I see a daughter of the king who just hasn't realized her crown yet." By Friday, I was falling. By Saturday, I was gone. He asked for my number, promised to call. And he did. Every single day for 2 months, even though he was back in Atlanta building his ministry. Long phone calls that lasted hours. Text messages filled with scripture and encouragement. Care packages with books about Christian living and handwritten notes that made my heart flutter. "I'm praying for you daily," one note said. "Ask God to show you the woman He created you to be." Another, distance means nothing when you're connected by spirit and purpose. When he asked if he could court me, court, not date, I said yes before he finished the question. Jacob courted me the old-fashioned way, like something out of a Nicholas Sparks movie, but with more Bible verses. He would drive the 4 hours from Atlanta to Birmingham every Friday evening, spend the weekend taking me to dinner, church events, walks in the park where we'd talk about everything from theology to our future family. He never tried to sleep with me, never even kissed me for the first 3 months. "I want to honor you," he'd say, "and I want to honor God. When we come together, it's going to be as husband and wife, the way it should be." Y'all, I thought this man was perfect. He brought me flowers every visit, not just roses, but carefully chosen bouquets with meanings. Sunflowers because he said my smile was like sunshine. White lilies because he said I reminded him of purity and new beginnings. Baby's breath because he said our love was as delicate and beautiful as those tiny white flowers. He wrote me letters, actual letters, on church stationery, in his careful handwriting. I kept every single one. Letters about how he saw our future, how he wanted to build a ministry together, how he believed God had brought us together for a divine purpose. One letter, I still remember word for word. "My darling Naomi, when I look at you, I see not just the woman I love, but the woman God has prepared to stand beside me in ministry. I see a wife, a mother, a first lady who will help me shepherd God's people with grace and wisdom. You are my gift from heaven, and I promise to spend every day proving myself worthy of that gift." My parents loved him immediately. My father, who had been suspicious of every man I'd ever brought home, sat on the front porch with Jacob for hours talking about scripture and life. My mother started planning our wedding before he even proposed, going on and on about what a godly man I'd found. "That boy loves the Lord first and you second," she'd say, and that's exactly how it should be. The church community embraced us as the perfect couple. Pastor Jenkins would call us up to the front sometimes during service, ask Jacob to pray over the young couples, use us as an example of godly courtship. "Look at this young man," Pastor Jenkins would say, his hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Flying 4 hours every weekend to spend time with his intended, taking his time, building a foundation on Christ. This is how it's supposed to be done, church." And I ate it up. Every compliment, every admiring glance from the older women in the church, every comment about how blessed I was to find such a man of God. I felt chosen, special, like I had won some kind of cosmic lottery. When Jacob proposed, 6 months after we started courting, it was everything a girl could dream of. He had arranged for both our families to be there, hidden in the church sanctuary. I thought we were just coming for a quiet prayer together before he drove back to Atlanta. But when we walked in, the lights came on, and there they were, my parents, his mother who had driven up from Montgomery, my sister, his sister, even Pastor Jenkins and his wife. The altar was decorated with white roses and candles. Jacob got down on one knee right there at the altar, where I'd first met Jesus again, where our story had really begun. "Naomi," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "6 months ago, God brought you into my life when I needed you most. You've made me a better man, a better Christian, a better servant of God. I can't imagine building my ministry, building my life, with anyone but you by my side." The ring was perfect. A simple solitaire diamond on a white gold band. Nothing flashy or expensive, but chosen with care. "Will you be my wife? Will you be my partner in life and ministry? Will you help me serve God's people together?" I said yes through tears, and the whole sanctuary erupted in celebration. Pastor Jenkins married us, right there on the spot in an impromptu ceremony, with our families as witnesses. It felt like a fairy tale. The official wedding came 3 months later. A beautiful ceremony in the same sanctuary where we'd met, with 200 guests, white roses and baby's breath everywhere, and a reception in the church fellowship hall where the whole community celebrated with us. I wore my grandmother's pearls and a dress that made me feel like a princess. Jacob wore a black tuxedo and cried when I walked down the aisle. Our wedding song was "God, a Woman and a Man" by Brian White, and we meant every word. In his vows, Jacob promised to love me, as Christ loved the church, to lead our family in righteousness, to be faithful, honest, and devoted until death parted us. I promised to be his helpmeet, his encourager, his soft place to land after difficult days in ministry. 2 hearts, 1 purpose, Pastor Jenkins said as he pronounced us husband and wife. May God bless this union and use it for his glory. Everyone said it was the most beautiful wedding they'd ever seen, that we were the perfect couple, that our marriage was blessed by God. I believed every word. We moved to Atlanta right after the honeymoon, a sweet week in Savannah where Jacob showed me off like I was his greatest treasure. This is my wife, he'd say to everyone we met, his chest puffed with pride. Isn't she beautiful? In Atlanta, Jacob was the associate pastor at Greater Faith Missionary Baptist Church, a large congregation with about 800 members. The senior pastor, Pastor Williams, was in his 70s and had been grooming Jacob to eventually take over the church. Our first apartment was small but cozy, a 1-bedroom place about 15 minutes from the church. Jacob had painted the walls a soft yellow before I moved in, hung up pictures of us from our courtship and wedding. He'd even bought new curtains and a comforter set in my favorite colors. I want you to feel at home, he said, carrying me over the threshold on our first day as husband and wife in our own place. This is our sanctuary. Those first months of marriage were everything I had dreamed of. Jacob would wake up at 5 a.m. every morning for prayer and Bible study, and I'd wake up with him. We'd have devotions together, reading scripture and praying before he left for the church office. He'd call me throughout the day just to check in. "How's my queen doing?" he'd ask. "What are you working on today?" I had gotten a job at a local elementary school teaching 3rd grade, something I'd always wanted to do. Jacob was so proud, bragging to everyone about his wife, the teacher. "She's educating the next generation," he'd say. "Planting seeds in young minds." That's ministry, too. Evenings, we'd cook dinner together, talk about our days, plan for the future. Jacob had big dreams for ministry. Wanted to plant a church someday, maybe write books, travel as an evangelist. He'd talk about the compound we'd build, with a main house for us and smaller houses for other ministry families. "We're going to do great things for God," he'd say, his arm around me, as we sat on our little couch watching the sunset through our apartment window. I can feel it. The church embraced me immediately. The older women took me under their wings, teaching me what it meant to be a pastor's wife. Sister Williams, the first lady, became like a second mother to me. "Honey," she'd say, "being married to a man in ministry is a calling all by itself. You're not just his wife. You're a representative of the church, a role model for the younger women, a counselor and prayer warrior. It's a big responsibility, but it's also a great honor." I took that responsibility seriously. I started a women's Bible study group that met every Thursday evening. I organized the church's annual women's retreat. I sang in the choir, taught Sunday school, helped with vacation Bible school. Jacob and I also started doing marriage counseling for younger couples, something Pastor Williams had suggested after seeing how solid our relationship was. "Y'all got something special," he said. "The way you look at each other, support each other, build each other up. These young folks need to see what godly marriage looks like." And we were good at it. We'd sit with couples who were struggling with communication, intimacy, finances, in-laws. Jacob would address the men, talking about spiritual leadership and loving sacrificially. I'd counsel the women about respect and support and keeping Christ at the center of the relationship. "The key," Jacob would always say, "is remembering that marriage is a 3-chord strand, you, your spouse, and God. As long as all 3 are connected, the cord can't be broken." People looked up to us. Young women in the church would come to me for advice about dating and relationships. Young men would ask Jacob how he had found such a godly wife. "Prayer and patience," he'd tell them. "When you're right with God, He'll send you the right woman at the right time." Sunday mornings were my favorite time. Jacob would preach with such passion, such conviction. And sometimes, right in the middle of his sermon, he'd look at me sitting in the front row and smile, or reference something we'd talked about at home. "My wife was telling me just this morning," he'd say, and I'd feel so proud to be mentioned, to be part of his ministry. After service, we greet people together at the door. Jacob would have his arm around my waist, introducing me to visitors, bragging on my teaching job or my ministry work. "This is my beautiful wife, Naomi," he'd say. "She's the one keeping me grounded and keeping me honest." People would comment on how blessed we were, how perfect we seemed together, how our love was an inspiration. "Y'all make marriage look easy," one young wife said to me after service one Sunday. "It's not always easy," I replied, "but when you're both committed to God and to each other, you can work through anything." I believed that with my whole heart. 2 years into our marriage, Jacob was promoted to senior associate pastor, with his own office and more responsibilities. He started traveling more, speaking at revivals and conferences. I was so proud of him, so excited about the doors that were opening for his ministry. "God is elevating you," I told him as he packed for a 3-day conference in Tennessee. "I can't wait to see what he does next. None of this means anything without you," he said, kissing me goodbye. "You're my anchor, baby. You keep me centered." But with the traveling came late nights and longer days at the church. Jacob would leave early in the morning and sometimes not come home until 9 or 10 at night. "Ministry is demanding," Sister Williams would remind me when I mentioned feeling a little lonely. "Your husband is answering God's call. Your job is to support him and pray for him."
So I did.
I prayed harder, supported more, complained less. When Jacob was too tired for our evening talks, I understood. When he had to miss dinner because of a church emergency, I kept his plate warm. When he fell into bed exhausted, too tired for intimacy, I told myself that was just the season we were in. Sacrifice is part of ministry life. I'd remind myself, we're serving God, not ourselves. But sometimes, late at night when Jacob was snoring beside me and I was staring at the ceiling, I'd wonder if this was what I'd signed up for. If being a good ministry wife meant being lonely in my own marriage. I'd push those thoughts away quickly, pray for forgiveness for being selfish, and remind myself how blessed I was to be married to such a man of God. I had no idea that while I was home praying for his ministry to succeed, my husband was already starting to build a secret life that would eventually destroy everything. Year 3 of our marriage was when things started to change, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I ignored, all the red flags I dismissed as just part of ministry life. It started small. Jacob's phone, which used to lie open on our kitchen counter, suddenly had a passcode. When I asked about it, he said, "Baby, I've got sensitive church information on there. Pastor Williams wants us to be more security conscious." Made sense to me then. The late-night emergencies became more frequent. Jacob would be in the middle of dinner, laughing and talking with me, when his phone would ring.
His whole demeanor would change.
"I'm sorry, honey," he'd say, already standing up from the table. "Mrs. Johnson's in the hospital again," or "there's a crisis with the youth group," or "Pastor Williams needs me to handle something urgent." And he'd be gone for hours. When he came home, he'd be quiet, distracted. "How did it go?" I'd ask, and he'd give me vague answers. "You know how it is. People going through things. I can't really talk about it." Confidentiality. The intimacy in our marriage started fading too. We went from making love regularly to maybe once or twice a month. When I tried to initiate, Jacob would be too tired, too stressed, too focused on preparing for Sunday's sermon. "I'm sorry, baby," he'd say, kissing my forehead like I was a child. "My mind is just so heavy with everything going on at the church." Rain check. The rain check never came. I started feeling like a roommate instead of a wife. Jacob would come home, eat the dinner I'd prepared, watch TV or work on his laptop, then go to bed. Our evening talks disappeared. Our morning devotions became rushed, with Jacob checking his phone throughout our prayer time. "You seem distant," I finally said one evening as he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, typing furiously while I cleaned up dinner dishes alone. "Is everything okay?" He looked up at me with irritation. "Naomi, I'm trying to prepare for 3 different services this week, plus I've got a conference call with a publisher who's interested in my book proposal. Can we talk about this later?" Later never came. I started feeling guilty for wanting my husband's attention. Started wondering if I was being selfish, too needy. Maybe this was just what it meant to be married to a man with a big calling. Maybe I needed to adjust my expectations. Sister Williams tried to encourage me. Honey, the devil attacks ministry marriages harder than any other kind, she said when I confided in her about feeling disconnected from Jacob. This is just a season. Pray harder, love deeper, and trust God. So I threw myself deeper into church work. If Jacob was too busy for me, I'd just be too busy too. I increased my Bible study groups, started a mentorship program for young women, volunteered for every church event. But the busier I got, the more Jacob seemed to pull away. You're never home anymore, he complained one evening when I came in at 8 p.m. from a women's ministry meeting. I'm doing church work, I said, confused. I thought you'd be proud. I need you here, supporting me, he said, not running around trying to build your own ministry. The criticism stung. I cut back on my church activities, tried to be more available when Jacob was home. But he still seemed disconnected, still spent most of his time on his phone or his laptop, still had emergencies that took him away from home multiple nights a week. Around this time, Jacob started traveling more. Weekend conferences turned into week-long revivals. 3-day trips became 10-day ministry tours. God is really opening doors, he'd say, showing me invitations to speak at churches across the South. This could be our breakthrough, baby. The platform we need to really make an impact for the kingdom. I wanted to be supportive. I packed his bags, prayed over him before every trip, bragged to the church about how God was using my husband. But inside, I felt more and more alone. The phone calls while he was away became shorter and less frequent. I'm exhausted, he'd say when I called to say goodnight. These people have me scheduled from morning to night. Can I call you tomorrow? Sometimes tomorrow never came. I started having trouble sleeping when he was gone. Our apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I'd lie in bed wondering what Jacob was doing, who he was talking to, if he missed me as much as I missed him. One night, about 6 months into this new pattern, I called him around 10 p.m. A woman answered his phone. Hello. Her voice was soft, confused. My heart stopped. Hi. I'm looking for Jacob Williamson. This is his wife. Oh. The woman sounded flustered. Oh, I'm so sorry. He left his phone in the sanctuary after service. I'm Sister Roberts. I help coordinate the revival. Let me find him for you. Jacob came to the phone a few minutes later, sounding breathless. Baby, I'm so sorry. I was in the pastor's office going over tomorrow's service order and left my phone in the pew. Thank God Sister Roberts found it. His explanation made sense, but something in my spirit felt uneasy. Jacob, I said carefully, is everything okay with us? What do you mean? I mean, you seem different lately. Distant. Like your mind is somewhere else even when you're here. He sighed heavily. Naomi, I'm under a lot of pressure right now. Pastor Williams is talking about retiring early, which means I might be taking over the church sooner than we expected. I've got book publishers interested in my work. God is moving in my ministry like never before. I need you to be patient with me, to support me through this season. I am supporting you, I said, tears starting to fall. But I feel like I'm losing you, like we're becoming strangers. You're being dramatic, he said, and his tone was sharp in a way it had never been before. I'm working hard for our future, for the ministry God has called us to build together. But if you can't handle the pressure, if you're going to be emotional and needy every time I'm trying to answer God's call, then maybe you need to pray about your own spiritual maturity. His words hit me like a slap. Jacob had never spoken to me that way before. The man who used to call me his queen, his gift from God, was calling me immature for missing my husband. I'm sorry, I whispered, immediately feeling guilty. You're right. I'll pray more. I'll be more supportive. Good, he said, his voice softening slightly. I love you, Naomi. But I need you to trust me and trust God's plan for our lives. After we hung up, I cried myself to sleep. And I prayed. I prayed for patience, for understanding, for God to help me be the wife Jacob needed during this busy season. I had no idea I was praying to support my husband's affair. If I'm being completely honest, Lorna Patterson had been in our lives from the very beginning. She was my college roommate, my maid of honor, the sister I never had. We'd been through everything together: late-night study sessions, heartbreaks, spiritual struggles, family drama. She knew me better than anyone except Jacob. Lorna was beautiful in that effortless way some women are. Tall and lean with smooth dark skin, natural hair that she wore in perfectly defined curls, and a smile that could light up any room. She was also deeply spiritual, led worship at her church in Memphis, and had always been the friend I called when I needed prayer or encouragement. When Jacob and I got married, Lorna was genuinely happy for us. She gave a beautiful speech at our wedding reception about how she'd prayed for me to find a godly man who would love me the way I deserved to be loved. "Naomi has the biggest heart of anyone I know," she said, raising her champagne glass. "She loves hard, she forgives easily, and she sees the best in everyone. Jacob, you better treat her like the treasure she is, or you'll have to answer to me." Everyone laughed, including Jacob. He hugged Lorna and thanked her for being such a good friend to me. "Any friend of Naomi's is family to me," he said. Over the years, Lorna had visited us in Atlanta several times. She'd stay for long weekends, sleeping on our couch, going to church with us, hanging out, and catching up on life. Jacob always seemed to enjoy her visits, would joke with her at dinner, and include her in our conversations about ministry and marriage. "Lorna, you need to find a good man like Jacob," he'd tease her. "Stop being so picky. When God sends me someone half as good as you," she'd shoot back with a laugh, "I'll snatch him up." It was innocent flirting, the kind that happens between friends. Or at least, that's what I thought. About a year before my world fell apart, Lorna started having problems in Memphis. She'd been working as a church secretary, but there was some kind of conflict with the pastor's wife, and she ended up losing her job. Then her grandmother, who she'd been living with, passed away, and she had to deal with settling the estate. "I'm thinking about relocating," she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "Memphis has too many bad memories now. I need a fresh start." "You should move to Atlanta," I said immediately. "You know we'd love to have you closer." Jacob was supportive of the idea too. "There are plenty of churches here that could use someone with Lorna's skills," he said. "And it would be good for you to have your best friend nearby." So Lorna moved to Atlanta. She stayed with us for the first month while she looked for a place, and Jacob helped her find a job as the administrative assistant at a church across town. He even helped her move into her new apartment, recruited some of the men from our church to help load the truck. Having Lorna in Atlanta was a blessing at first. When Jacob was traveling or working late, I had someone to have dinner with, someone to talk to. She became like a sister to our church family too, joining the choir, helping with special events. But looking back now, I can see when things started to change. It was subtle at first. Lorna started asking a lot of questions about Jacob's travel schedule, his work at the church, his plans for the future. When he'd call me while he was away, she'd often be at our apartment hanging out, and she'd ask to speak to him when we were done talking. "Tell Jacob I said hi," she'd say. "And tell him I'm praying for the revival." Sometimes she'd text him directly, sending scripture verses or words of encouragement for his ministry. Jacob would show me the messages, laughing about how sweet Lorna was to think of him. "Your friend is a real prayer warrior," he'd say. I'm blessed to have her spiritual support. When Jacob was home, the three of us would often have dinner together. Lorna would cook for us sometimes, bringing groceries over and preparing elaborate meals while telling stories about her day or asking about our ministry plans. "Y'all are going to be such a power couple for God," she'd say, looking back and forth between Jacob and me. "I can't wait to see what he does through your marriage." But I started noticing little things. The way Lorna would dress up more when she knew Jacob was going to be around. How she'd laugh a little too loudly at his jokes. How she'd find reasons to touch his arm when she was making a point or hug him just a little too long when she was leaving. And Jacob started to change around her too. He'd be more animated, more flirtatious. He'd compliment her cooking, her hair, her spiritual insights. He'd tease her about needing to find a man, but in a way that seemed more intimate than friendly. "Lorna's a rare woman," he said to me one night after she'd left. "Beautiful, spiritual, knows how to take care of a man. Some pastor is going to be very blessed to find her." Something in my chest tightened when he said that, but I pushed the feeling away. Lorna was my best friend. Jacob was my husband. They were just being friendly. The first time I felt real suspicion was about 6 months after Lorna moved to Atlanta. Jacob had been in South Carolina for a week-long revival, and I'd been texting him throughout the week, but not getting many responses. When he finally called on Friday night, I mentioned that I'd been trying to reach him. "Sorry, baby," he said. "The schedule here has been brutal. Morning sessions, afternoon workshops, evening services. I barely have time to sleep." But when I talked to Lorna the next day, she mentioned that Jacob had called her earlier in the week. "Wednesday night, I think it was," she said casually. "He was asking me to pray for the services, said the crowds weren't as big as they'd hoped." Wednesday night, when he'd been too busy to call me. I didn't say anything to either of them about it, but I started paying more attention. And the more I paid attention, the more uncomfortable I became. Jacob and Lorna started texting each other regularly. I'd see his phone light up with messages from her while we were watching TV, and he'd smile as he read them and quickly type back a response. "What's Lorna saying?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just checking on me," he'd say, putting his phone face down. "She's worried about how hard I've been working." Lorna started having more crises that required Jacob's pastoral counseling. She'd call upset about something at her job, or struggling with a spiritual question, or needing advice about a situation at her church. And Jacob would always make time for her, even when he claimed to be too busy for me. "She's new to the city," he'd explain when I'd express frustration. "She doesn't have anyone else to turn to for godly counsel." The phone calls became longer and more frequent. Sometimes Jacob would step out on the balcony or go into our bedroom and close the door when Lorna called. "She's dealing with some personal stuff," he'd say when I asked why he needed privacy. "It's sensitive." I started feeling crazy, suspicious of my own husband and best friend. I'd pray about it, ask God to take away the ugly thoughts I was having. But the thoughts kept coming. Things reached a breaking point about 2 months before I caught them together. I came home from school one afternoon and found Jacob and Lorna sitting very close together on our couch, looking at something on his laptop. They jumped apart when I walked in, both looking guilty. "Hey, baby," Jacob said, closing the laptop quickly. "You're home early." "I didn't have any meetings today," I said, looking back and forth between them. "What are y'all working on?" "I was showing Lorna some of the material for my book," Jacob said, getting her input on a chapter about friendship in ministry. Lorna nodded quickly. "It's really good stuff," she said. "Deep insights about spiritual relationships." But something felt off. They were both talking too fast, avoiding eye contact with me. And there was an energy in the room, a tension I'd never felt before. That night, after Lorna left, I finally confronted Jacob. "I need to ask you something," I said as we were getting ready for bed. "And I need you to be honest with me." Jacob paused in the middle of brushing his teeth. "Okay. Is there something going on between you and Lorna?" He turned around, toothbrush still in his mouth, and stared at me like I'd slapped him. "What?" he said after spitting out the toothpaste. "What did you just ask me?" "You heard me," I said, my heart pounding. "The two of you have been spending a lot of time together, texting constantly, having private conversations. And today when I walked in, it felt like I was interrupting something." Jacob's face went through several expressions: surprise, hurt, and finally anger. "I cannot believe you just asked me that," he said, his voice rising. "Lorna is your best friend. She's like a sister to me. The fact that you would even think something like that shows how jealous and insecure you've become." "I'm not jealous," I protested. "I'm just..." "You're just what? Paranoid? Suspicious of your own husband who's been faithful to you for 4 years? Suspicious of your best friend who loves and supports you?" His words made me feel small, crazy, like I was imagining things. "I'm sorry," I said, tears starting to fall. "I didn't mean to accuse you. I feel like I'm losing you lately. We barely talk anymore, we're not intimate, you're always distracted or traveling. And then Lorna moves here, and suddenly you have time for long conversations with her, but not with me." Jacob's expression softened slightly, and he sat down on the bed beside me. "Baby," he said, reaching for my hands. "I understand why you might feel that way. Ministry has been demanding, and I know I haven't been as present as I should be. But that has nothing to do with Lorna, and everything to do with me trying to build something for our future." He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in months, he felt like my husband again. "Lorna is going through a hard time adjusting to Atlanta," he continued, stroking my hair. "She's lonely, she's struggling spiritually, and she turns to us because we're the only family she has here. If I'm counseling her, it's because that's what pastors do. If I'm spending time with her, it's because she's your best friend and I want to make sure she feels loved and supported." His explanation made sense. I felt guilty for doubting him, for letting my insecurities poison my view of innocent friendship. "I love you, Naomi," he said, lifting my chin to look at me. "Only you. You're my wife, my partner, my gift from God. Don't ever doubt that." We made love that night for the first time in weeks. Passionate, connected, the way it used to be. I fell asleep in his arms feeling foolish for my suspicions and grateful that my husband still loved me. But Jacob's reassurances were lies. While I was feeling guilty for doubting him, he and Lorna were already deep into an emotional affair that was about to become physical. I just didn't know it yet. The 2 months between that conversation and the night I discovered them together were like living in an alternate reality. On the surface, Jacob seemed to be trying harder. He'd bring me flowers occasionally, compliment my cooking, make more of an effort to ask about my day. But underneath, I could feel something was still wrong. The phone calls with Lorna continued, but now Jacob was more secretive about them. He'd step outside to take her calls, or go into the bathroom, or wait until I was in the shower. When I'd ask what she wanted, he'd give vague answers. "Just checking in," he'd say. "She's having a hard time at her new church." The text messages became more frequent too. Jacob's phone would buzz constantly throughout the day, and he'd check it immediately, sometimes smiling at whatever message he'd received. When I tried to peek over his shoulder playfully, the way I'd always done, he'd tilt the phone away. "Personal counseling stuff," he'd say. "You know I can't share details." But since when was text messaging an appropriate way for a pastor to counsel someone? Since when did counseling require secret phone calls and hidden conversations? I started having that dream again. The one where I was trying to reach Jacob, but he kept walking away, getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared entirely. I'd wake up with my heart pounding and my palms sweating, feeling like I was losing my mind. The intimacy issue got worse too. We went from making love once a week to once a month, then barely at all. When I tried to initiate, Jacob would find excuses. He was tired, stressed, had an early morning, wasn't feeling well. But I'd catch him texting late into the night, smiling at his phone in the dark next to me. "Who are you texting so late?" I asked one night when the glow from his phone woke me up. "Nobody," he said quickly, putting the phone face down on his nightstand. "Just reviewing notes for tomorrow's service." But I had seen enough to know he wasn't looking at sermon notes. He was in a text conversation, and I'd seen the heart emoji before he flipped the phone over. The traveling increased too. Jacob was gone almost every weekend, and often for several days during the week. Revival meetings, conferences, guest preaching engagements. His ministry was definitely growing, but the success felt hollow when it was pulling him further away from me. And every time he left town, Lorna would find reasons to come by the house. She'd bring dinner, want to watch movies, need someone to talk to about her job or her love life or her struggles with loneliness. "I don't know how you do it," she'd say, curled up on my couch eating the Chinese food she'd brought over. "Being married to someone with such a big calling. It must be lonely when he's gone so much." "It is hard sometimes," I'd admit. "But ministry requires sacrifice. I knew that when I married him. Still," she'd say, "you deserve to feel cherished, appreciated, loved." There was something in the way she said it that made me uncomfortable, like she was fishing for information about my marriage. But I pushed the feeling away. Lorna was my best friend. She was just being supportive. One evening, when Jacob was in Mississippi for a week-long revival, Lorna and I were having dinner at my kitchen table when my phone rang. It was Jacob calling for our nightly check-in. Minutes, him telling me about the services, me updating him on my students, and my day at school. Normal conversation. But when we were about to hang up, Lorna spoke up. "Tell Jacob I said hey." She called out loud enough for him to hear. "Lorna says hi." I relayed. "Tell her I said hi back," Jacob said. "And tell her I got her message earlier. I'll call her tomorrow to talk about that situation she's dealing with." After I hung up, I turned to Lorna. "What situation?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, just some drama at my church. Jacob's been giving me advice on how to handle it." But something felt wrong. Why hadn't Jacob mentioned that Lorna had called him earlier? And why did he need to call her back tomorrow, when he could have just talked to her while I had him on the phone? I started paying more attention to the little details, like how Lorna always seemed to know Jacob's travel schedule, sometimes better than I did, or how she'd mentioned conversations she'd had with him that he'd never told me about, or how she'd started dressing differently, more makeup, more form-fitting clothes, especially when she knew Jacob would be around. The breaking point came about 3 weeks before I caught them together. Jacob was supposed to be in Nashville for a men's conference. He'd been gone since Thursday, and it was now Saturday evening. I had called him earlier in the day, but gotten voicemail. I tried again around 8 p.m. "Hey, beautiful," he answered on the second ring, but his voice sounded strange. Breathless. "Hi, baby," I said. "How's the conference going?" It's great," he said, but I could hear noise in the background that didn't sound like a church event. Music. Laughter. Really powerful sessions. "Are you at the evening service?" I asked. "Yeah, we're just finishing up. Listen, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of something." "Oh, okay. I love you." "Love you too." He hung up quickly, and I felt unsettled. Something about the call didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on what. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Lorna. "Hey girl. Working late at the church tonight. This place is so quiet when nobody's here. Hope you're having a good evening." My blood ran cold. If Lorna was at her church in Atlanta, and Jacob was at a conference in Nashville, why had the background noise on his call sounded exactly like the kind of music Lorna's contemporary church would play? I tried to push the thought away, but it gnawed at me all night. Sunday morning, I called Jacob before he was supposed to head home. "How was the rest of the conference?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Incredible," he said. "Life-changing stuff. I can't wait to implement some of these ideas in our ministry." What was the theme of last night's session? There was a pause. Just a brief one, but long enough that I noticed. Spiritual warfare," he said. "Breaking generational curses. Really deep stuff." But something in his voice told me he was lying. When he got home that afternoon, he seemed different. Distracted.
Guilty.
He was extra affectionate, bringing me flowers and suggesting we go out to dinner, talking about how much he'd missed me. But that night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him texting again. The soft clicking of his phone keyboard went on for at least an hour. That's when I started to plan. I needed to know the truth, but I also needed proof. Because if I was wrong, if I was just being paranoid and jealous, I wanted to know that too so I could get help and stop poisoning my marriage with suspicion. But if I was right, then everything I'd built my life on was a lie. 2 weeks later, Jacob announced another trip. A prayer retreat in rural Georgia, about 2 hours away. A small church had invited him to lead a weekend of intensive prayer and fasting for their congregation. "It's going to be very intimate," he said as he packed his bag. "Maybe 20 people total. The kind of deep, spiritual work that can really transform lives." He'd be leaving Friday afternoon and coming back Sunday evening. A quiet weekend for reflection and prayer. "I wish I could come with you," I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. "This one is just for me," he said, kissing my forehead. "But I'll call you every day. And when I get back, maybe we can plan a weekend away for just us." The promise made me hopeful. Maybe this was what we needed, some time apart so Jacob could focus on God, and then intentional time together to reconnect. He left Friday afternoon with his overnight bag and his Bible, telling me he loved me and would call me that evening. The call never came. Saturday morning, I tried calling him but got voicemail. I tried again Saturday afternoon. Same thing. By Saturday evening, I was starting to worry. What if something had happened? What if there was an emergency? I called the church where he was supposed to be doing the retreat. The phone rang and rang with no answer. I found their website and got the pastor's cell phone number from the contact page. "Pastor Johnson?" I said when he answered. "This is Naomi Williamson, Jacob Williamson's wife. He's supposed to be leading a prayer retreat at your church this weekend, and I can't reach him. Is everything all right?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you mean. We don't have anyone named Jacob Williamson here this weekend. In fact, we don't have anything scheduled at all." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice shaking. He said he was leading a prayer retreat for about 20 people. "Ma'am," Pastor Johnson said gently, "I'm the only pastor at this church, and I've been here all day. We haven't had any visitors or guest speakers. Are you sure you have the right church?" I thanked him and hung up, my hands trembling. Jacob had lied to me. He wasn't at a prayer retreat. He was somewhere else entirely.
But where?
That's when I remembered the dream I'd had a few nights before. The one where I kept trying to reach Jacob, but he kept walking away. In the dream, I had followed him, and he had led me to a house I didn't recognize. A house where Lorna was waiting. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Just because Jacob had lied about where he was didn't mean he was with Lorna. Maybe he was planning a surprise for me. Maybe he was dealing with some kind of personal crisis he didn't want to worry me with. But deep down, I knew. I got in my car around 9 p.m. Saturday night and started driving toward the address where Jacob had told me the retreat was supposed to be. It was a 2-hour drive through rural Georgia, and I spent the entire time praying that I was wrong, that I'd find Jacob exactly where he said he'd be, that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But when I arrived at the address, I found exactly what I expected to find. A small, rural church with a parsonage beside it. And in the driveway of the parsonage, Jacob's car parked next to a rental car I didn't recognize. The lights in the parsonage were on. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at that house, knowing that my marriage was about to end, but not sure I was ready to face it. Part of me wanted to turn around and drive home, pretend I'd never made this trip, go back to living in denial. But I couldn't. I had to know the truth. I got out of my car and walked quietly to the front door of the parsonage. It was unlocked. I turned the knob slowly and stepped inside. The living room was empty, but I could hear voices coming from the back of the house. Jacob's voice. And a woman's voice that I knew as well as my own. Lorna. I followed the voices down a short hallway toward what I assumed was the bedroom. As I got closer, the voices became clearer. "I can't keep doing this," Jacob was saying. "Living a lie. Pretending with her when all I want is to be with you." "I know," Lorna replied, her voice soft and intimate in a way I'd never heard before. "But we have to be careful. If she found out—" "She's not going to find out," Jacob said. "She trusts us completely. Sometimes I think she's willfully blind to what's right in front of her."
They were talking about me.
About how naive I was, how easy I was to fool. "I hate deceiving her," Lorna said. "She's my best friend." "If she was really your best friend," Jacob replied, "you wouldn't have fallen in love with her husband." I heard the sound of kissing, soft murmurs, the rustle of clothing. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to keep walking toward that bedroom door. I had to see it. I had to witness it with my own eyes, because otherwise, a part of me would always wonder if I'd imagined it. I pushed the bedroom door open, and there they were. My husband, my best friend, tangled in bedsheets that weren't ours, in a bed that wasn't ours, in a life that wasn't the one I thought we were building together. They were so lost in each other that they didn't notice me at first. Jacob was on top of Lorna, moving slowly, deliberately, the way he used to move with me in our early days of marriage. Her legs were wrapped around him, her fingers tangled in his hair, and she was making soft sounds that I recognized because I used to make them too.
It was Lorna who saw me first.
Her eyes flew open and met mine over Jacob's shoulder, and the expression on her face, shock, fear, guilt, will be burned into my memory forever. She screamed. Not a word, just a pure, primal scream that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Jacob jerked up, following her gaze to where I stood in the doorway. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The three of us were frozen in this tableau of betrayal, like some twisted painting of everything that was wrong with the world. Then Jacob scrambled off the bed, grabbing a pillow to cover himself, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Naomi," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "Baby, it's not what it looks like." And that's when I started laughing. Not a happy laugh. Not even a bitter laugh. This was something else entirely, a sound that came from a place inside me I didn't know existed. It echoed off the walls of that little bedroom, bouncing back at us like an accusation. "It's not what it looks like?" I repeated, still laughing. "It's not what it looks like?" I gestured at the scene in front of me. My naked husband, my naked best friend, the rumpled sheets, the clothes scattered on the floor. "What exactly do you think it looks like, Jacob? What exactly do you think I'm seeing right now?" Lorna had pulled the sheet up to cover herself, tears streaming down her face. "Naomi, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I said, my laughter stopping as abruptly as it had started. "You're sorry?" I looked back and forth between them, these two people who had been the most important people in my world just 5 minutes ago. "How long?" I asked. Neither of them answered. "How long?" I repeated, louder this time. Jacob cleared his throat. "Naomi, let me explain." "I don't want an explanation," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I want to know how long you've been sleeping with my best friend." Lorna was crying harder now, her whole body shaking. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of deception, of me feeling crazy for suspecting what was right in front of my face. "Since when?" I pressed. "Since the conference in Nashville," Jacob said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "It wasn't planned, Naomi. It just happened." The conference where he'd called me with strange background noise. The conference that was supposedly about men's ministry, but where he'd somehow ended up with my best friend. "You've been lying to me for 6 months," I said, more to myself than to them. "Every time you traveled, every time you had a church emergency, every time you needed privacy for a phone call. You've been lying to me for 6 months." "I never meant for this to happen," Jacob said, taking a step toward me. "You have to believe me. I love you, Naomi. I never wanted to hurt you." "You love me?" I asked, incredulous. "You love me, but you've been sleeping with my best friend for 6 months? You love me, but you lied about where you were this weekend so you could be with her? You love me, but you just told her that I'm willfully blind and easy to fool." Jacob's face went white. He hadn't realized I'd heard that part of their conversation. "That's not. I didn't mean." "What did you mean, Jacob?" I asked. "What exactly did you mean when you said your wife is too stupid to see what's right in front of her face?" "I'm going to be sick," Lorna said suddenly, and she ran from the room, still clutching the sheet around herself. I could hear her retching in the bathroom down the hall. Part of me wanted to go to her, to hold her hair back the way I had so many times in college when she'd had too much to drink. Old habits die hard, I guess. But I stayed where I was, staring at my husband who was still standing there naked except for a pillow, looking like a stranger. "Put some clothes on," I said finally. "We need to talk." Jacob nodded and started gathering his scattered clothing. I watched him get dressed. This man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years. This man whose body I knew as well as my own. I watched him pull on his boxer shorts, his pants, his shirt, the same clothes he'd packed so carefully yesterday while telling me about the prayer retreat that didn't exist. When he was dressed, we stood there looking at each other across the room where he'd just been making love to another woman. Where he'd been making love to my best friend. "Why?" I asked. It was such a simple question, but Jacob seemed to struggle with it. He opened his mouth several times without speaking, running his hands through his hair the way he always did when he was nervous. "I don't know," he said finally. "You don't know?" I repeated. "You threw away 7 years of marriage. You betrayed your calling as a pastor. You destroyed our friendship with Lorna, and you don't know why." "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said. When she moved to Atlanta, it was just she was your friend. She was lonely, going through a hard time. I was just trying to help her by sleeping with her.
No.
It started out innocent, just friendship, just counseling. But then we started talking more, spending more time together. And she understood things about ministry that were different from what you understood. What things? I asked. Jacob hesitated. The pressure, the loneliness, the weight of always having to be perfect, always having to have the right answer, always having to be on for everyone else. You could have talked to me about that. Could I? He asked, and for the first time, there was anger in his voice. Could I really? Every time I tried to share my struggles with you, you just tell me to pray more or trust God more. You wanted a perfect pastor husband, not a real man with real problems. His words hit me like a physical blow. That's not true. Isn't it? When's the last time you let me be weak around you? When's the last time you didn't have a scripture verse ready when I was struggling? When's the last time you just listened without trying to fix me? I wanted to argue with him, to defend myself, but there was something in what he was saying that rang uncomfortably true. Had I been so focused on being the perfect pastor's wife that I'd forgotten how to be a real wife to a real man? So you turned to Lorna instead, I said. She listened, he said quietly. She saw me as a man, not just as a pastor. She understood the burden of ministry because she'd grown up in the church too. And she made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. What about our marriage vows? I asked. What about forsaking all others? What about being faithful until death do us part? Jacob looked down at his feet. I know I broke my vows. I know I sinned against you and against God. But Naomi, I fell in love with her. I didn't plan to, but I did. Those words, I fell in love with her, were somehow worse than walking in on them having sex. Sex could be just physical, just weakness, just a moment of temptation. But love meant this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Do you love me at all? I asked. Jacob looked up at me, and I could see tears in his eyes. I'll always love you, Naomi. You were my first love, my wife, the mother I hoped our children would have. But what I feel for Lorna, it's different. It's deeper. It's what? I pressed. It's what I thought I felt for you, but stronger. If he had hit me with his fist, it wouldn't have hurt worse than those words. Lorna came back into the room then, having put on Jacob's undershirt and a pair of his boxers. Her face was blotchy from crying, her hair disheveled, but she still looked beautiful. She'd always been the prettier one, the more confident one, the one who turned heads when we walked into rooms together. Naomi, she said, her voice hoarse. Please let me explain. Explain what? I asked. Explain how you've been pretending to be my friend while sleeping with my husband? Explain how you've been coming to my house, eating my food, listening to me cry about my marriage problems while you were the cause of those problems. It wasn't like that, she said, fresh tears starting to fall. I never meant for this to happen. I love you like a sister. Sisters don't sleep with their sister's husband. I know, and I hate myself for it. But Naomi, I fell in love with him. I tried to fight it, I really did. But when we were together, it felt so right, like we were meant to be together. Meant to be together? I repeated.
He's married. To me.
He took vows before God to be faithful to me. I know, she whispered. But sometimes God's will isn't what we expect it to be. I stared at her in disbelief. You think God wanted you to sleep with my husband? I think God brought us together for a reason, she said. Jacob and I, we have a connection that's spiritual as well as physical. When we're together, it feels blessed. Blessed. I was starting to feel dizzy, like the room was spinning around me. You think your adultery feels blessed? Jacob stepped forward then. Naomi, what Lorna is trying to say is that we believe God might be leading us in a different direction than we originally thought. Sometimes his plans aren't the plans we made for ourselves. I looked back and forth between them, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't just an affair. They weren't just giving in to temptation or having a moment of weakness. They were planning a future together. You want to leave me? I said. It wasn't a question. Jacob nodded slowly. I think it might be best for everyone. You deserve someone who can love you the way you need to be loved. And Lorna and I, we have something special. Something God-given. God-given, I repeated flatly. I know how it sounds, Lorna said quickly. I know how wrong this looks. But Naomi, you have to understand, we didn't choose this. It chose us. They had it all figured out. They'd probably been planning this conversation, this moment, this breakup. They'd been lying in bed together talking about how they'd tell me, how they'd spin their adultery as God's will, how they'd make me the villain in the story of their grand love affair. And, the worst part of me almost believed them. These were two people I'd trusted completely, two people who knew more about Scripture and God's will than almost anyone I knew. If they said this was God's plan. But then I remembered something. A verse I'd memorized as a child, sitting in Sunday school next to my grandmother. God is not the author of confusion, I said quietly. Jacob and Lorna looked at each other.
What? Jacob asked.
1 Corinthians 14 verse 33, I said, my voice getting stronger. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. That's what my grandmother used to tell me whenever I was trying to justify something I knew was wrong. If you're confused about whether something is right or wrong, baby girl, it's probably wrong. God's will is clear and peaceful, not confusing and complicated. I looked around that bedroom, at the evidence of their affair, at their guilty faces, at the mess they'd made of all our lives. Does this feel peaceful to you? I asked. Does sneaking around, lying, betraying vows, breaking up a marriage feel like God's will? Neither of them answered. I'm leaving, I said. I'm going home, and I'm calling a lawyer. Jacob, I'll have papers drawn up. You can have your God-given love affair. You can have your blessed adultery. But you can't have me too. I turned to walk away, but Lorna called after me. Naomi, wait.
Please.
Can we talk about this? Can't we work something out? I stopped and looked back at her. Work something out? Like what? Some kind of sister-wife situation? Maybe we can all live together and share Jacob? Maybe we can take turns cooking dinner and doing his laundry. That's not what I meant, she said. What did you mean, Lorna? What exactly did you think we were going to work out? She didn't have an answer for that. I loved you, I said to her. I loved you like the sister I never had. I would have done anything for you. I let you into my home, my marriage, my life. And you repaid me by stealing my husband. I didn't steal him, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. He came to me willingly. That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke completely. I walked over to where she was standing and slapped her across the face. Hard. The sound echoed in the quiet room, and Lorna stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek. Naomi, Jacob said, moving toward me. Don't, I said, pointing at him. Don't you dare act like you're going to protect her from me. Don't you dare act like I'm the one who's out of line here. I looked at both of them one more time, these two people who had been my world just an hour ago. I hope you're happy, I said. I hope whatever this is was worth destroying everything we built together. I hope it was worth 7 years of marriage, 20 years of friendship, and whatever's left of your integrity as a man of God. And then I walked out. I walked out of that bedroom, out of that house, out of that life I'd thought was mine. I got in my car and drove home, crying so hard I could barely see the road. And when I got to our apartment, my apartment now, I guess I called my sister. Sarah, I said when she answered, my voice breaking. I need you to come over. I need you to come right now. What's wrong? She asked, immediately alert. Jacob's been having an affair, I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. With Lorna. I just caught them together. I'm on my way, she said without hesitation. Don't do anything. Don't make any decisions. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. While I waited for Sarah, I sat on the couch where Jacob and I had planned our future, where we'd watched movies and talked about the children we wanted to have, where just last week he'd held me and promised that everything was going to be okay. And I tried to figure out how my life had fallen apart so completely in the space of a single evening. Sarah arrived at my apartment 30 minutes later, still in her pajamas with her hair in a messy bun, carrying a bag of tissues and a bottle of wine. "Where are they now?" was the first thing she asked as she wrapped me in a hug. "Still at the retreat house, I think," I said, my voice muffled against her shoulder. "Or maybe they left. I don't know, and I don't care." Sarah held me while I cried, the ugly, body-shaking kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep in your soul. The kind of crying that hurts your chest and makes your throat raw. I cried for my marriage, for my friendship with Lorna, for the future I'd thought we were building together, for the naive woman I'd been just a few hours ago who still believed her husband was faithful. When the tears finally stopped, Sarah made us both tea and sat beside me on the couch. "Tell me everything," she said.
So I did.
I told her about the months of distance, the suspicious phone calls, the lies about where Jacob was going. I told her about finding out the prayer retreat didn't exist, about driving to that house, about what I'd seen and heard. 6 months, I said, wrapping my hands around my warm mug. "They've been together for 6 months, Sarah. While I was praying for my marriage, while I was fasting and asking God to fix whatever was wrong, my husband was sleeping with my best friend." Sarah shook her head. "I never liked him." I looked at her in surprise. "You never told me that." "You were happy," she said with a shrug. "And he made you feel special, at least in the beginning. But there was always something about him that felt performative, like he was playing a role. The role of a godly man? The role of whoever he thought people wanted him to be. With the congregation, he was the perfect pastor. With you, he was the perfect husband. With your parents, he was the perfect son-in-law. But I always wondered who he really was underneath all that performing." I thought about what Jacob had said in the bedroom, about Lorna seeing him as a man instead of just a pastor. Maybe that was what had drawn him to her, the chance to be real with someone, to be imperfect and struggling and human. But that didn't excuse what he'd done. That didn't excuse the lies, the betrayal, the deliberate deception. "What am I going to do?" I asked. "First," Sarah said, "you're going to get a lawyer. A good one. Someone who specializes in divorce and knows how to protect your interests." "A divorce," I repeated. The word felt foreign in my mouth. In our church, divorce was the ultimate failure, the thing that happened to other people, the thing that proved you hadn't prayed hard enough or tried hard enough or loved hard enough. "Naomi," Sarah said gently, "he's been having an affair for 6 months. With your best friend. And when you caught them, instead of being sorry, they tried to convince you it was God's will. This isn't a marriage anymore. This is just a man using your faith against you." She was right, but it still hurt to hear it. "The church is going to blame me," I said. "They're going to say I drove him to it somehow, that I wasn't submissive enough, or supportive enough, or attractive enough." "Let them," Sarah said fiercely. "Anyone who would blame a woman for her husband's adultery isn't someone whose opinion matters anyway." We talked until sunrise, making plans, discussing options, trying to figure out how to untangle 7 years of shared life. When Jacob finally came home around 8 a.m., looking haggard and ashamed, I was ready for him. "We need to talk," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway of what had been our living room. "No," I said calmly. "We don't. Sarah's already called her lawyer friend. Someone will be contacting you about the divorce papers." Jacob's face crumpled. "Naomi, please. Can't we work through this? Can't we go to counseling, try to save our marriage?" "There's nothing to save," I said. "You made your choice 6 months ago. Every day for 6 months, you chose her over me. You chose lies over truth. You chose adultery over your vows." "I made a mistake," he said, tears starting to fall. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You're sorry you got caught," I corrected. "If I hadn't driven to that house last night, how long would this have gone on? How long would you have kept lying to me?" Jacob didn't have an answer for that.
"I want you out," I said. "Today."
"Take what you need for now, and we'll figure out the rest through lawyers." "Where am I supposed to go?" I looked at him with disgust. "I don't know, Jacob. Maybe you can stay with your girlfriend. You know, the one you've been planning a future with." Chapter 9. The Church. Jacob left that afternoon with 2 suitcases and his tail between his legs. He didn't tell me where he was going and I didn't ask. But I knew the hardest part was still ahead of me: telling the church. In ministry marriages, personal problems don't stay personal. The congregation feels like they have a right to know, a right to judge, a right to choose sides. And in most cases, they choose the pastor's side. I decided to get ahead of the story. If I let Jacob control the narrative, I'd be painted as the bitter, vengeful wife who couldn't forgive a moment of weakness. I needed people to know the truth. That Sunday, I got dressed and went to church as usual. I sat in my regular spot in the front row, held my head high, and smiled when people greeted me. "Where's Pastor Jacob this morning?" Sister Williams asked. "He's dealing with a personal matter," I said vaguely. "Pastor Williams will be preaching today." During the service, I noticed people whispering, casting glances in my direction. Word was already starting to spread that something was wrong. After service, I asked Pastor Williams if I could speak to the congregation before they left. "Of course, Sister Naomi," he said, though he looked concerned. "Is everything all right?" "I'll explain," I said. I walked to the podium, where Jacob had preached so many sermons about faithfulness and integrity. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "Church family," I said, "I need to share something with you, and I'd rather you hear it from me than from rumors and gossip." The sanctuary grew completely quiet. "Yesterday, I discovered that Jacob has been having an affair. I caught him with another woman, and this relationship has been going on for months. As of today, I filed for divorce." The gasps and murmurs that followed were immediate and loud. I saw shock on some faces, disappointment on others, and unfortunately, judgment on a few. "I know this is difficult to hear," I continued. "I know many of you love Jacob and have been blessed by his ministry. But I also know that this congregation values truth, and you deserve to know the truth about your pastor." Pastor Williams stood up and walked to the podium beside me. "Church," he said, his voice heavy with sadness, "this is indeed a difficult day for our fellowship. We will be praying for both Jacob and Sister Naomi during this time. But let me be clear, there is no excuse for adultery. There is no justification for breaking sacred vows. Jacob will not be returning to ministry here." The next few weeks were brutal. About half the congregation rallied around me, bringing meals, offering support, expressing their shock and disappointment in Jacob. But the other half seemed to blame me somehow. "Maybe if you'd been more attentive to his needs," one woman suggested. "Men have different requirements than women," another said. "Sometimes we have to turn a blind eye to certain things." "Divorce is a sin," said Sister Patterson, Jacob's biggest supporter in the church. "The Bible is clear about that. You should forgive him and work to restore your marriage." It was Sister Patterson who delivered the most hurtful blow. "I always wondered if you were too independent," she said to me after a particularly difficult Sunday service. "Always working, always involved in your own ministries. Maybe if you'd focus more on being a wife and less on being a career woman." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you seriously suggesting that my teaching job caused my husband to commit adultery?" "I'm just saying that when a man's needs aren't met at home, he might look elsewhere." That was the last Sunday I attended Greater Faith Missionary Baptist Church. Chapter 10: The Divorce. The legal proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Jacob didn't contest anything. He signed the papers, agreed to the division of assets, and seemed almost relieved to have it over with. What surprised me was learning about the extent of his deception. Through my lawyer, I discovered that Jacob had been using our joint credit cards to pay for hotel rooms, dinners, and gifts for Lorna. He'd even purchased a piece of jewelry for her, a necklace that cost more than my wedding ring. "The financial infidelity is almost worse than the sexual infidelity," my lawyer, Margaret Chen, explained. "He was literally making you pay for his affair." The church community was divided about Jacob too. Pastor Williams had immediately suspended him from all ministry duties, but Jacob had supporters who felt he was being treated too harshly. He made a mistake, they argued, but he's still a man of God. Forgiveness and restoration should be the goal. Jacob tried to repent publicly, standing before what remained of the congregation to ask for forgiveness and announce his intention to seek counseling. But his words rang hollow to me. He talked about his moment of weakness and his lapse in judgment, language that minimized what had actually happened. 6 months wasn't a moment. 6 months was a choice he made every single day. What really opened my eyes was when other women started coming forward. First, it was Sister Young, a young mother who had sought Jacob's counseling during her marital problems. She revealed that Jacob had made inappropriate comments about her appearance and had suggested that her husband didn't appreciate her beauty the way he could. Then Sister Davis came forward. She'd confided in Jacob about her struggles with depression, and he'd offered to pray with her privately. During these prayer sessions, he'd held her hands longer than appropriate, told her she was special, and eventually suggested that God might want them to have a closer relationship. Neither woman had been intimate with Jacob, but both described feeling manipulated and confused by his behavior. "He made me feel like God was telling him we were meant to be together," Sister Davis told me privately. "If I hadn't moved away for work, I think he would have tried to take things further." Suddenly, Jacob's affair with Lorna wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of predatory behavior, of a man using his position as a pastor to manipulate vulnerable women. The final divorce decree was granted 8 months after I caught them together. Jacob and Lorna had moved to Tennessee by then, where Jacob had found work at a small church that apparently didn't ask too many questions about his past. I heard through mutual friends that he was preaching again, that he and Lorna had gotten married in a small ceremony, that they were presenting themselves as a couple who had found love after their respective failed marriages. They were rewriting history, making themselves the heroes of their own love story instead of the villains in mine. The first year after my divorce was the hardest year of my life. I moved back to Birmingham, closer to my family, and took a teaching job at a different school. I found a new church, a smaller, more progressive congregation where divorced women weren't treated like lepers. I went through the stages of grief like textbook cases. Denial, maybe they were just confused. Anger, how dare they betray me like this? Bargaining, maybe if I pray harder, God will restore my marriage. Depression, I'll never be able to trust anyone again. And finally, slowly, acceptance. Therapy helped. Pastor Johnson, my new minister, recommended a Christian counselor who specialized in trauma and betrayal. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just adultery, it was spiritual abuse. Jacob used your faith against you, she explained during one of our sessions. He knew that your Christian beliefs about marriage, forgiveness, and submission would make you more likely to blame yourself for his behavior. He counted on your desire to be a godly wife to keep you from questioning his actions. That realization was both painful and liberating. Painful because it meant Jacob had deliberately manipulated my faith to cover his sins. Liberating because it meant his infidelity truly wasn't my fault. I also had to grieve the loss of Lorna's friendship. In some ways, her betrayal hurt worse than Jacob's. I'd expected my husband to be faithful, but I'd also chosen him from among many options. Lorna, though, she'd been chosen for me by circumstance, by shared experiences, by the kind of deep friendship that usually lasts a lifetime. How could she do it? I asked Dr. Martinez during one session. How could she look me in the eye every day, listen to me cry about my marriage problems, comfort me when I felt like I was losing Jacob, all while she was sleeping with him? Some people are capable of compartmentalizing in ways that seem impossible to those of us with healthy consciences, Dr. Martinez said. She may have genuinely convinced herself that she was helping you by being there for you, even while she was betraying you. But she said she loved me like a sister. She probably did in her way. But her love for herself, her desires, her needs, those took priority over her love for you. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I made new friends, women who had also been through divorces and understood the unique pain of starting over in your 30s. I threw myself into my teaching, finding purpose in nurturing young minds and helping children learn and grow. I started dating again, tentatively at first. The first man who asked me out was a fellow teacher, a kind, patient man who understood when I needed to take things slowly. We dated for 6 months before I felt comfortable enough to introduce him to my family. It didn't work out long-term, but it was good practice, a gentle re-entry into the world of relationships and trust. I learned to be alone without being lonely. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try, but never had time for when I was busy being the perfect pastor's wife. I traveled, taking trips to places Jacob had never wanted to visit. I adopted a dog, a rescue pit bull mix named Grace, who became my constant companion and taught me about unconditional love. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. The woman who had ignored red flags and dismissed her own suspicions was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't settle for less than she deserved. 3 years after my divorce was finalized, I was living in a cute little house with Grace, teaching 4th grade at a school I loved, and dating a wonderful man named Marcus who owned a bookstore and treated me like I was precious. That's when I got the call from Sarah. "You need to see this," she said without preamble when I answered the phone. "See what?" "Check your email. I'm sending you a link to a news article." I opened my laptop and found the link Sarah had sent. The headline made my blood run cold. Tennessee pastor arrested on charges of sexual misconduct with minor. The pastor was Jacob. According to the article, Jacob had been arrested for allegedly having an inappropriate relationship with a 17-year-old girl in his congregation. The girl's parents had discovered text messages between Jacob and their daughter, messages that were described as sexual in nature and grooming behavior. Jacob denied the charges, claiming the relationship was merely pastoral counseling, but the evidence was apparently overwhelming. The girl, who is now 18, had come forward with detailed accounts of how Jacob had gradually escalated their relationship from spiritual mentoring to emotional manipulation to physical contact. I sat staring at the computer screen, feeling a mixture of vindication and nausea. Vindication because this proved that Jacob's problem wasn't just a moment of weakness with Lorna, it was a pattern of predatory behavior. Nausea because I realized how close I'd come to bringing children into the world with this man, how those children might have been in danger. The article mentioned that Jacob's wife, Lorna, had filed for divorce immediately after his arrest and was cooperating with the investigation. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. A week later, Lorna called me. I almost didn't answer. I'd changed my number after the divorce, specifically to avoid contact with anyone from my old life. But somehow, she tracked down my new number. "Naomi?" Her voice was smaller than I remembered, broken. "What do you want, Lorna?" I wanted to apologize. And to tell you that you were right. I was right about what? About Jacob. About everything. He's not the man we thought he was. There was a long silence. Then Lorna started crying. "He did the same thing to me that he did to you," she said through her tears. The lying, the manipulation, the making me feel like I was crazy when I started to suspect things. And now this thing with a girl? "I can't do this, Lorna," I said. "I can't be your counselor or your friend or your support system. You made your choice 3 years ago." "I know," she whispered. "I know I have no right to call you. I know you must hate me." "I don't hate you," I said, and I realized it was true. "But I don't forgive you either. And I certainly don't trust you. I understand. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. That you didn't deserve what we did to you. That you were a good wife and a good friend, and we were the ones who were broken." After I hung up, I sat in my living room with Grace curled up beside me, thinking about the woman I used to be. The woman who would have rushed to comfort Lorna, who would have offered forgiveness immediately, who would have blamed herself for not being more understanding. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The woman I'd become understood that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, that compassion didn't mean accepting abuse, that loving someone sometimes meant protecting yourself from them. Jacob was eventually convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His ministry career was over, his reputation destroyed, his life in ruins. I felt no joy in his downfall, but I felt no sadness either. Justice had been served, not by me, but by the truth finally coming to light. It's been 5 years now since I discovered Jacob and Lorna together in that little parsonage in Georgia. 5 years since my world fell apart, and I had to rebuild it from scratch. Marcus and I got married 2 years ago in a small ceremony in my new church, surrounded by people who knew my story and loved me anyway. He's everything Jacob pretended to be: honest, faithful, kind, and secure enough in himself that he doesn't need to manipulate or control others to feel powerful. We're expecting our first child in 3 months. A daughter. We're going to name her Hope. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not trying harder to save my marriage with Jacob. If I think I gave up too easily, if I should have fought for him instead of walking away. The answer is simple. You can't fight for someone who's already chosen someone else. You can't save a marriage when only one person is actually in it. Jacob made his choice long before I caught them together. Every lie he told, every secret phone call he made, every time he chose her over me. Those were his choices. My only choice was how to respond when I finally learned the truth. I chose myself. I chose my dignity. I chose a future built on honesty instead of a past built on lies. And I've never regretted that choice for a single day. To the women watching this who might be going through something similar, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If you're being told you're crazy or paranoid or too emotional, pay attention to that feeling instead of the person trying to dismiss it. Your intuition is not your enemy. Your softness is not weakness. And your story doesn't end with betrayal. It begins again with the courage to walk away from what's breaking you and toward what might heal you. I'm proof that you can lose everything you thought mattered and still find everything you actually need. Stay strong, stay wise, and never let someone else's inability to love you properly make you question your own worth. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. If this helped even one person feel less alone in their pain, then it was worth reliving every difficult moment. Please subscribe if this touched you, and let me know in the comments. What's your story of survival? What's your story of starting over? We're stronger together, and your story matters too. Until next time, stay blessed, stay powerful, and never let anyone dim your light. I love you all. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories of love, betrayal, healing, and hope. Your support means everything to me.
Hope you're enjoying my story. Please feel free to share your thought on the comment section, and please subscribe.